Hello and welcome back to Boxing Behind the Scenes on the Boxing Social podcast in association with Betfred. Delighted to be joined here today for the first time I've interviewed you anyway, by manager, matchmaker, all-around boxing extraordinaire, Mr. Paul Reddy of STN Sports. Very official introduction. How are you, Paul?
Very well, mate. It's nice to get some love from you. Big up AP. AP's been pushing STN since we've launched, but now it's the first time you and I have had a chance to speak, so...
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
Old Andy Puraway has been hogging you all to himself, but I'm glad that I've got a good chunk of your time today to talk all things STN Sports and indeed across British boxing. For people who don't know, of course, you worked at Matchroom for 7 years at Matchroom?
5 years.
5 years at
5
Matchroom.
years, yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was cool. It was culture shock because I've kind of different jobs before, worked in IT, more kind of salesy type jobs, worked in finance, but you go there and initially very, very quickly the actual I'm working in boxing kind of diminishes pretty quick, just with the hours, the expectation. I was doing social media to start with, took over from Matt Rich, big up Matt Rich, he's now with the World Boxing Super Series. Yep. And just was doing that, traveling around the UK and done that for 2 years, kind of AJ, what's the first AJ fight? Zumbano Love, with that kind of little highlight reel.
The highlight reel knockout. I think I see that clipped yesterday. Somebody was talking about, check out this Anthony Joshua one-punch knockout. That was 2005.
2015.
2005? That Errol Spence maths.
Errol Spence maths, I remember that. 2015, yeah. So that was Birmingham. But that card was crazy because you had Cal Yafai, Callum Smith, I think Gamal, and they all just had one round. It was like one round KOs. So I didn't match that card. But so done it for 2 years. Used to sit next to John Wishausen, who was their long-standing matchmaker. He was Barry's matchmaker before as well. So learned quite a bit from John, and we kind of chewed the fat a bit on opponents and just discussed ideas. Eddie would be sat in the corner and they'd go through cards and I'd be like, this person might not be a base. He's like, oh, okay, cool. You know, probably some of them you probably thought, shut the fuck up, you know. But other times he kind of took it on board, and Eddie kind of saw that. And I think over time, when John came to leave, he handed his notice in after AJ Molina 2016, and then they approached me and said, "Look, probably a bit sooner maybe than what we envisaged, but would this be of interest to you?" I said yes straight away. Didn't know too much about what the matchmaking would entail. I knew that making fights, but the medicals, the going out to market to get the fighters, all the other stuff that comes with it, it was a bit of a culture shock, but a good one.
Yeah, it's important to point out that matchmaking isn't just going, I think he would be good for this guy, I'll see you later. Yeah. Like, there's an awful lot more.
There's no supermarket, right? You can't, look, your missus texts you on the way, but Rob, we need milk. You can't, you know, right, well, okay, red oat, you know, there's not, sometimes you're struggling to get, not just the UK, but the people aren't available, so you've got to be a bit creative.
Yeah, I think matching in particular at the minute and kind of the last 12 months with this kind of post-COVID or current COVID, whatever you want to look at it, lockdown boxing, matching has become, you know, a vogue topic. Some soft matches we've seen. We've also seen some very interesting, probably slightly tougher than expected matches. Was matching something that you'd always kind of anticipated going to? It kind of sounds like you kind of organically fell into it a little bit.
I think so. I kind of took the job. I didn't really know where it was going to lead to, but kind of Barry and Eddie, I sensed that they wanted me to kind of grow within the company and move into different roles. I think once I got into the matchmaking role, there was probably always that sort of sense that John was mentoring unofficially and I was going to gravitate into that. I think if he wouldn't have left, I might have ended up doing some of the 4 and 6 rounders to start with, the prospects, and then inevitably when you come to retire, I'd kind of step into those shoes. So yeah, and I think again, once you do the matching, it's now opened up to what I'm doing now, because you see good things that fighters have with their teams, bad things that you do a bit different, things you take on board yourself. So again, that seemed like even more of a natural progression.
Now, I know you won't be offended by this, and I kind of fall into the same bracket in a sense of boxing is kind of the only sport where you could have gone that way and been, you know, where you are now, which is very, very successful in still a very short space of time. You kind of consider when you came into the sport. Me, myself, the same. You know, I kind of have got to the position that I'm in, which I probably wouldn't have been able to do in any other sport. The accessibility of other sports is not the same as it is with boxing. What have you found to be the biggest challenge of kind of navigating through boxing and life as a matchmaker and going into management?
Yeah, I think probably the obvious one that there's probably some people privately that think he's never had a fight, which is the obvious one, which is fair. But I probably last time I had a fight was about 15. I can't imagine that went particularly well. In fact, I can't remember it. But I think it's one of those things where, look, certainly in boxing, the best coaches tend to be fighters. You can get managers that have boxed as well, but I think sometimes you need to have that ability to kind of step out of the equation a bit as well. So I'm not knocking anyone that is a trainer manager. I think it works. It works for certain fighters. But for me to be completely subjective, I feel just purely focusing on the managing is the best for the fighter because it's a bit more compartmentalised.
When you first started matching fighters, what was the experience like then? How was that for you? And compare that to kind of the last period of time when you would have been seasoned, you'd have seen it all, you'd have had... Seasoned. And you'd have had, certain fighters come and go, and you'd have learned from certain scenarios that are always presented in this funny old sport. How do you develop, and what are the key things to kind of develop in that position?
Yeah, I think it's kind of studying the fighter that you've got in terms of, or the particular fights you're matching. So you're almost breaking the card down to a degree. I mean, Eddie would do the main event. I would kind of probably do the rest of the card. Some of the other fights would just happen organically, the board of all of them, or there'd be particular final eliminators. I think Ryan Burnett so the first card I matched was Ray Vargas v. McDonnell Hull, Feb 2017. So Ryan Burnett was on that card. I wouldn't say it was a comeback, I think, but he was kind of moving towards becoming a world champion. I think he'd become a world champion against Haskins later that year. So I remember talking to Adam, first time we'd properly spoke, and fair play to Adam, he kind of showed a lot of faith in me. He kind of broke down what exactly he was looking for opponent-wise. They wanted someone quite durable. I mean, Adam's very particular, as you can imagine. No, in a correct way, because there's things he's been working on that he wants to see from Ryan. So he wanted someone that's actually going to pose those questions. Can't remember the guy's name, but he done well. And I guess I went a bit safe to start with. I think he'd boxed someone in Ryan's weight class, and we'd had a couple of opponents. We bounced them around. I watched it. Well, no, actually, I think this will work. Again, I'm not a trainer, so Adam's probably seeing more from the fighter than me. And I think quite quickly he was like, okay, well, this guy has a clue. More of a clue than I'd probably expect for someone that's just starting. And then I think towards the end, you're kind of free rolling a bit. It's, people that you've watched on undercards, also recommendations from people. What, I guess, particular constraints the fighter has. So if they can't deal with someone with quick feet, like the left of the body is a little bit susceptible to that. If you know that someone throws that, you're kind of just trying to counter that. But equally, if they're at a point where you want to progress them and move them on, you give them those questions because they need to answer them for themselves, because the jump is too vast when they kind of, progress up to European world or, whatever level they get to.
Any in particular... I asked, obviously, Al Siesta, somebody you know very well. The Mad Russian himself was in here a couple of weeks ago, bouncing around the podcast studio as he likes to do. I'll ask you the same question I asked him. Any accidents, any in particular ones that you remember thinking, maybe that was not the right match at the right time?
I must admit, there's probably, hand on heart, I can say that I'll probably stand by every fight that I've made. I've never railroaded a manager, a trainer to take a particular fight. Probably one of the most... renowned would have been Wankino against Egginton. My defence on that, right? So little trick that I kind of learned over my time. He was a super lightweight. Sam was a welterweight. Now, Sam was booked to fight Brandon Rios on the Joshua Povetkin card, correct. So Sam had seen the artwork. He knew that fight was coming. Look, we probably should have taken him off that card. A collective decision, Eddie, Barry and myself, because Barry was, and still is, particularly close with Sam. So Look, John Pegg's a matchmaker. He matches Steve Wood. He was in safe hands with us too. It wasn't like, this guy was, dangerous. But the week before, it's probably a bit of a gamble. For me, I thought it'd be a good fight for a couple of rounds. Sam would overwhelm him and stop him because of size. But it was, and I sort of described this to John before, it was almost like Sam was like a computer character and the controller had been put down because he just didn't, I don't know what, there was just a memory block and it was awkward. I was sat there in the front row next to Barry thinking, fuck, I'm going to lose my job. Not over Sam Egginson, no disrespect, Sam, but I think I'm sat there and he just wasn't moving, throwing shots, doing anything. And it was almost like he was waiting to be stopped. So
he got smashed by that left hook at the end of the first round, wasn't it? Right before the bell.
And sometimes as well, that there's occasions when I've got in and watched people on the pads and you're like, well, okay. Because you can watch footage and think, they look dangerous, but sometimes you get people over and you're a bit like, okay, yeah, you can just, I don't know, just there's a certain sound and kind of the manner in which they're sort of turning and pivoting. You think, yeah, this could be a bit interesting. So yeah, that's probably one where, look, hold my hands up. Maybe if he didn't have that fight against Rios scheduled and he was aware of it, I might have got the fight that I thought in my head would have been perfect. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember thinking, everybody at the time was thinking, who's putting him on that card? He's boxing on the AJ undercard. So I can imagine that didn't go particularly, didn't go down particularly
but in
well.
fairness, I remember Eddie coming up to me afterwards and he just said, we probably should have pulled him off. There wasn't like, what the fuck have you done? And Barry was just like, he didn't defend. So in fairness, fair play to them both. They kind of backed me there. Maybe privately it was different, but I think, and even John was like, what's wrong with him? I don't know, what happened there, but...
That period of time at Matchroom, obviously Matchroom as a business has now gone global, with obviously the help of DAZN and moving into new territories. You don't have to look at the fight that they've got coming up this weekend, albeit this interview won't go out until after this weekend, but it's Roman Gonzalez, Juan Francisco Estrada, you got Hiroto Kawaguchi on the card. These are kind of like, you go back 10 years ago and you're talking about these fighters being on Matchroom cards, you'd be thinking that something's sort of gone, not wrong, but something's very different. But that period of time that you worked there, is kind of probably the second half, I would say, of that golden era of British boxing. It must have been such a fun period of time to work in the sport.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it was amazing. And just even the kind of the initial doing the Matchroom USA shows, remember being sat there in Monaco and like, it was Jacobs Arias was the first one over there. Oh, so, you're getting the undercard all sorted. I'm like, and we partnered up with another promotion, a smaller promotion outfit, Solita Promotions, and they had a matchmaker and him and I were doing it. But even then, New York will probably be the last state, I think, to open up for boxing because they are so strict. Yeah. And rightly so after, the kind of sort of tragedies fighters have had there over the years. But it was cool. You had that. Obviously AJ, AJ Klitschko being sat there in the dugout, the England dugout, watching AJ Klitschko and just the drama of that fight. It was phenomenal. And you kind of become a bit immune as well to some of the faces and celebrities. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked past and you just kind of, it's Arnie. And you think, again, probably when I first started, I'm like, it's Arnie, Terminator. Just kind of walked past and it was, it's pretty surreal. But no, it was cool. And then you kind of had, obviously, Joshua Ruiz, Brooke Golovkin, some of the pay-per-views like Lomachenko coming over, Usyk, you've seen some of the best fighters. I've been fortunate as well because I'd almost, when people were boxing abroad, LA, New York. I kind of was the one that was sort of catapulted out as I got a bit more experience. They probably felt comfortable. I went to Jeddah for Smith Groves with Callum Smith. So yeah, they probably felt that Reddy's out there. He's, we know it's all going to be cool and there's not going to be any problems. So
it's kind of like with boxing in general. A lot of things get thrust upon you quickly, and I think in various different elements of the sport, and not necessarily talking about in the ring, but also in the ring, where things become sort of thrust upon you, and it's very much kind of sink or swim at sometimes. Yeah. When you're dealing with it, now obviously Matchroom's expanded, but going back to your period of time, there wasn't 30, 40 members of staff, and you are kind of put into these positions where it's not necessarily sink or swim, but you do have a lot on your plate, particularly with that type of expansion. Yeah. But such a benefit looking back to have that experience of all the different facets of the business.
Oh, massively. And I think towards the end, I was kind of, Eddie and Frank were leading the charge of, the US business growing and DAZN come on board. And I wouldn't say I was kind of running the UK because you had Ross Garrity, big up Ross, and some other more senior members of staff as well. But certainly fight week around the event, other than speaking to Sky on the event side, I would, undercard, right, fighters, okay, we're, just trying to structure stuff, right, we're going to the venue early Saturday morning, these are the dressing rooms I want to go with, and just other small sort of logistic aspects I was getting involved in. So I felt, and Matchroom's a type of organisation where I learned that quite quickly, where you almost just, you take ownership of stuff. You don't wait for someone to point, so that needs to be done. Well, no, I've got this, I'll kind of handle this and just do it myself. So it was cool, like really, really good experience. Some amazing times, a lot of time from home. Look, you've got a young family. I'm sure for yourself, it's quite challenging. That does present some headaches, earaches, especially on a Thursday when I'm trying to close a card off. I've got Al Siesta, Christian Kirky people ringing me, going, "Oh, Paul, we need the passports and stuff." So you're getting people to book flights, and I'm trying to sit there with my missus, and she knows I'm going away for 3 days, and it's just, it's tough. But you're just trying to balance everything out. So it's, it was cool. But looking back, I do think sometimes you wonder how you do it.
Yeah, you do wonder how you do it. But when you're in it, you don't really think about it. You don't have the chances.
You just
blinkers
completely
on, you go straight
tunnel
forward.
vision,
And then once LCS has rung you 200 times in a day, all the Americans decide to call you because American people still haven't worked out that there's a time difference. Now, obviously, people know you as Paul Reddy, STN Sports, not the name that you were always known as. Well, you were known as several names at Matchroom, so I hear, but the one that stuck was Green Book.
Green Book, yeah.
So explain to us where that nickname come from.
Yeah, so the British Boxing Board of Control, the book is now white, but White Book, as Anthony Lever, big up Winks, he'll be watching this, sort of now Matchroom USA, he come up with that name, and then it sort of shortened to GB. So GB was kind of, I'd get that text, but I remember when I first come into the job, you have to do, I've got a matchmaker's license, have that for 3 years now. I've got a manager's license. But when I had the matchmaker's license, just like tiny things like board levy, if you box abroad, there's a percentage you have to pay. Not necessarily the weights are quite self-explanatory, but just other small little tricks. And look, a bit geeky, I kind of read it. I felt if someone asked me, rather than hang on a minute, I'd have the answer there. So there was a couple of times where Eddie or Barry or whoever would throw something at me, and I could answer it, and they were like, "Oh, Green Book, GB and stuff as well." And I remember Eddie he put a screenshot, I think, in the group, and he just had like Green Book in lowercase as my name saved on his phone. So but it's cool. It was kind of, I suppose there was a compliment within the piss taking, right?
Yeah, no, of course, I'm sure there was a compliment in there somewhere. You mentioned Eddie. What was Eddie like to work with?
We had a laugh, like on the whole. I mean, the no context thing, which everyone's now seeing. He's always been like that, and just more kind of little anecdotes, funny stories with pals and things going on at home. He was funny, demanding, I suppose, for the right reason. Look, if you've done something good, it was well done. That was it. But if you made a mistake, you kind of knew about it, and I think that was just how the business has been run. It's how they are so successful, where it's kind of the expectation is that you're doing great and the shows are good and everything is kind of running seamlessly. Quite hard to get hold of, certainly towards the end. I could always get hold of him if I rang him. If his phone rings from me, he's like, shit, who's pulled out or who's injured? I'm like, all right, mate. Oh, no, just speaking to Ed Robinson from Sky. I think we should put Tennyson here on the card. Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, do that. So, yeah, that kind of, you just little tricks to kind of get him to answer the phone and other things. But no, on the whole, look, him and Barry especially, look, I wouldn't be sat here. I wouldn't, not solely, but they took a punt on me. They probably could have got someone else in. So, always be grateful for the opportunities they gave me.
Why did you leave?
I left because I felt that I wanted to manage. I was very keen to do that. That was something, I think, within 18 months of doing the job. I wouldn't say I mastered it because you've got, Bruce Trampler, Brad Goodman, top rank, plenty of matchmakers that did it for like 20, 25, 30 years. But I think for me, it was an evolution, and a lot of the kind of 2016 Olympians, Lawrence Okoli, Boatsi, Katie Taylor, I'd kind of managed and worked with those guys. Connor Ben's someone who I'm very proud of the work that myself, Tony Sims, Neil Bowers, big up Neil Bowers, he used to sort of match as well. And Siesta and Kirky, there's a lot of people who contributed towards Connor's development. He had to go in the ring and do it. But I just felt that I knew that I could manage fighters. I'd gained enough expertise. And I think that to be completely subjective, I had to leave Matchroom. I think also as well that 37 kids, I've always wanted to run my own business, work for myself. And I think the greatest respect to their kind of infrastructure, I was only ever going to be able to probably do 70% of my capabilities because you've got a boss, you've got someone to answer to. Look, my decisions and ideas, maybe sometimes I'd have thought that's great, other times shut up. But with me, it's all on me. Obviously Sean O'Toole, business partner I work with, we kind of bounce ideas off. But certainly with the boxing, it's, I kind of ride and die by my decisions. And that's the sort of buzz, the pressure that I know will bring out the very best in me.
A lot of people, I'm not just saying it because you're sat here, but a lot of people kind of, spoke about the importance of yourself at Matchroom and the difficulty in replacing you when you left. And it was kind of a void that, by all accounts, still certain aspects of it that's still required to be filled. What did that mean for your relationship with Eddie in the short term? Obviously, you're working with him, or you've worked with him with Callum and getting the Canelo fight. I mean, business is business. You've obviously worked together since then, but any change in your relationship since you left?
I think, in fairness, that sort of relationship with Eddie, he was always, my boss. We kind of sort of socialise a bit. Myself, Eddie, Frank, few of us. You'd have a couple of beers after a show. You'd have a few beers on a Friday. We'd go out for a bit of food. Probably never friends, like outside of work, of course. But I think, look, with Eddie, I suppose, probably quite unexpected for him to leave. But he got it. He got my, he kind of respected my decision. And look, it did leave them in a bit of a jam because there wasn't a younger me or someone else to kind of step into the role immediately. I know a couple of people were kind of helping out and assisting there and stuff. But I think, look, Sandy, who I'm sure we'll speak about, and the level of the other fighters that we're dealing with, look, he's going to be interested in them. Frank Warren's going to be interested in them. Top Rank going to be interested in them. So I think if Matchroom, which I'm sure they will want to have the best fighters available, certainly the best amateurs, the best professionals, I don't think me working with them is going to be a problem. So, yeah, look, we had a chit-chat in Dallas, just normal. It's almost like Frank Smith as well. It's like I hadn't seen those guys for almost coming up for a year, but it was just normal. We worked together 5-6 years, travelled the world. So they know me very well. I know them very well. I think, look, it's business, right? But I've done it for me. There's no personal issues there. I left for my own progression and just to continue to grow as a person.
An amicable parting in boxing. It's
a rarity.
The unicorn of the boxing business. You mentioned kind of Frank Warren there. It's something that you're sort of keen to discuss with you. You worked at Matchroom for such a long time, closely connected there still. Still open to working with Frank? Has there been any conversations with you and Frank?
I've spoke to George Warren. I mean, we kind of live similar-ish areas. So I live Hertfordshire, they're from Hertfordshire. So kind of know of similar people. I'm a bit older than George. But yeah, I've spoke to George a couple of times. He's cool and stuff. And I think that it's important for people to know that I am impartial now. That, look, okay, I've got great links with Matchroom. I know the staff there very well. But I'm not naive to think that they're going to do me any favours because I am now another manager in the pit of managers and management companies. It's important for me to do what's best for the fighter. If Queensbury or Frank Warren or Top Rank or PBC, if they are the best option, then we'll take that option. So I think it's very important that I start to develop a relationship with those guys because I'm sure at some point we will have a fight with Frank Warren.
Going back to what you were saying about the fighters that you've matched from the start. Now, Conor Benn, you very rightly say there, he's made tremendous strides and great improvements under Tony Sims. And, matching him in that initial phase in particular would have been, I would imagine, kind of doubly tricky. The fact that he was very much a raw novice when he started, but also came with such a big name and a big expectation. I'd imagine that through kind of more, I don't want to say problems, but kind of obstacles or things for you to think about as a matchmaker in that position as it would do, or rather than it would with kind of your average run-of-the-mill novice. What was that like in the initial phase with Conor?
Yeah, I think it was difficult for Conor, especially because he was the one that had to get in the ring. I think one thing I've always admired about him was that he's sort of mentality and attitude, and I think people are now seeing it. He had that brilliant interview after the Formella fight, but I've known that. I've spent a lot of time around Conor and Tony and Nigel. That's him. He's always been like that. And look, he doesn't need to fight. He wants to fight this. And it's not, my dad don't know. He's just maybe a bit crazy. They're all a bit crazy, these boxers. But I think, look, it was difficult because, and I think Matchroom are going to find a similar thing with Campbell Hatton. Yeah. And I've had discussions with people about that, and they've probably got to adopt a similar kind of, not just me, but approach that was taken with Conor. But I think with Conor, it was, he was a kind of a wanted man, a bit of a target on his back. And even now you're seeing Marku and other people want to fight him because of the surname and because of what he's done. So, look, we had to kind of tread quite carefully, looked at people that had under probably 10 professional fights. That wasn't a prerequisite, but I just thought, look, if we go with someone that's quite novice, a novice professional, we looked at their amateur background. So, look, okay, if they're ABAs, that's fine. If they haven't, progressed on to GB or, been good enough to go and do that, or even done English or, something of that particular level, then we'd probably think that person's probably a bit too experienced. And then as he got to maybe double figures, we then stretched that out. So, okay, people that have had under 20 fights, someone from this. There was a couple of opponents that when Conor moved from super lightweight to welter, we still looked at super lightweights because, it's 7 pounds, isn't it? The disparity's not massive. So, we kind of, I think we treaded quite carefully there. The Paynard fight, maybe put him back a couple of steps, did make that. And
I was just going to ask about that. What was going through your mind in that fight? That also, by the way, much consternation is kind of made about the result. It was controversial in some instances, but I think one of the things is what a brilliant fight. That was one of the best six rounder brilliant fight. Yeah.
So knew he was a kickboxer, and again, I think Conor was getting to a point where he was blowing a lot of people away. So I felt, right, we need to get someone that's quite tough. And Mr. Siesta had got, no. But I think, look, we had the conversation. I spoke to Tony. I always work closely with Tony. I spoke to Eddie, and Look, we knew he was going to be tough, and I think in my head, I've always got an idea of what I want from the opponent. Sometimes, probably 85% of the time you get it, but I wanted someone tough and durable that was going to ship a few punches and that he could break down. But 6 rounds isn't long in terms of pro boxing. So, yeah, I remember standing at the back next to Joe Cordina and Ross Garrity, and the first time he got put down, apparently my skin was the same colour as this wall in here. And they're like, mate, you're right. And I was, just wow. And
then he got knocked down again.
He got knocked down again, and everyone's looking at you because not Eddie and everyone's like on the front rows fixated on the fight, but the people around, and they're like, oh, mate. But again, that is the that's the kind of the very negative part. And I was stood there, legs were because again, look, Conor was been pushed massively by Sky
and Reebok deal.
Reebok deal as well. So everything. So I'm like, am I going to be the man that single-handedly ruined his career? But fair play to him, and he showed what we now know, that he's got a real set of stones on him. And he kind of won the rematch even more convincingly. But I think afterwards, he come in the office and he said to me, he's like, Paul, thank you. That was one of the best lessons I've ever had. He said, I just thought this was easy. I was blowing people away. It was going to be pretty straightforward from now, and it's not. I'd always joke with some of the Olympians and say, look, there'll be a time when you'll be looking at me after the fight where I need to get someone that's going to question how strong is your heart? What's your chin like? Can you deal with pressure? You need to have that test, not solely just to find out what level you can get to, but actually just to find out what you're made of. And that for me, like especially with Okoli, Boaz is not too far away. I think Cordina, be excited to see him come back. I mean, it's a difficult division he's in. But those guys and girls are now at that stage where they're the fights they've got to have. So everyone's going to see how good they are. And if there is any chinks in the armour, then, against those types of opponents, it will, become visible.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point there, and it's kind of what it's all about. And you'll know you probably weren't thinking about it at the time, but in hindsight, looking at all of that stuff happening and the experience that you would have gained from that night as well, obviously, as well as what Conor would have gained, it's kind of what it's all about.
It is.
And maybe you'd have felt slightly differently if Payno would have got the decision. Probably would have been a little bit of a different memory of it.
But I wasn't kind of like, oh shit, we need to go and get him someone.
Yeah,
dig someone up and just put them on a stake, like a plant that's not flopping away. It was, well, now, okay, this is good. Maybe we just go a step back, but we now know that we don't want anyone that's, too tough and too much of a punch.
You don't need too much of those fights, no matter what stage you are in your career. You don't
especially
need too many of those. Yeah. Save those for the 12 rounders at the title level. Don't worry about those who are taking the miles off the clock after 6 rounds. Also, have to deal with Nigel Benn on the other end of the phone if it goes wrong, which I can imagine that would have been interesting.
Interesting,
you mentioned Lawrence Okoli and Joshua Buatsi. Now, kind of, we've spoken about Conor Benn as a raw novice. They're not raw novices, although admittedly Lawrence was still somewhat raw when he turned over as a professional, but they come from the GB setup, which I know you have a very good connection there. The difference between matching those guys and Conor Benn, I'd imagine, can be quite stark in that initial phase.
Yeah, I mean, I would say debut, Okoli is the hardest person I've ever matched.
He boxed Jeffrey Cave.
Jeffrey Cave, right? And that fight was done. It was in Manchester on, I want to say, it might have been Crawler Linares, one of the two fights, possibly. And Thursday, so I think we had an overseas opponent. There was an issue there medically, so he was gone. And I'm ringing around the UK, and it's almost you get a chuckle down the phone. And look, again, it gets more expensive as you get closer, but it's Thursday. And Steve Goodwin at the time was managing Mr. Cave. And look, we knew what it was. I needed someone to get in the ring. There's a deadline with the British Boxing Board. Basically, Thursday is your cut-off to get an overseas person over. And rightly, way before COVID, of course, but just allow them to fly over and get acclimatised, blah, blah, blah. So that window's shut. So I'm going through the UK cruiserweights, and I don't know at the time whether it was 30 in the UK or something, and he was like 28 or 29. And it was Lawrence's debut, and I think his second fight was scheduled, or second or third against Russell Henshaw on the Joshua Klitschko card. So got Mr. Cave, and he got, bless him, he did get caved. He did get caved in, And there's still a couple of people at Matchroom, I won't name them, but they'll probably watch this, where I still occasionally do get a little video of just a Okoli. They're going, oh mate, just FYI, we're putting the cave video out for Okoli. I'm like, brilliant stuff, guys.
That was a savage knockout.
That was absolutely savage.
He was chinned him with a right hand, and then he went back onto
the
ropes, and then he hit him with another follow-up right hand, if I remember rightly. That was.
I must admit, you're pleased to obviously fill the slot and that Lawrence made his debut. But when he was laying on the floor, again, sense of responsibility, because I'm like, shit, is it right? And he gets up and you're like...
That's kind of the double-edged sword of things. Well, not double-edged sword of things, but that has to be in the back of your mind as a matchmaker. I mean, we've seen some opponents, and I'm not, it certainly isn't a criticism level.
Maybe a couple.
maybe the odd opponent with regards to kind of the B side, the away corner over the years. And we have seen some, let's call it what it is, some real shocking mismatches on shows in the UK and abroad. That split second of, is he okay, must be a real hard... You know, I can imagine the hairs on the back of your neck for those moments. I mean, you've not been involved in a fight, to my knowledge, where there has been a serious incident, but when we saw Patrick Day and Charles Conwell on a Matchroom show not long after you would have left, that would have been... Or
that was
would
you... that was in the US.
US.
So
but still, you're kind of close to it, and you would have known who made that fight, and obviously being on a Matchroom show, that must be, you know, at times something that does creep up on you.
It does, and I think you kind of forget it sometimes. Probably like the fighters when they're in there. Look, it's the most dangerous sport in the world, and that's why they should be getting paid properly. But the risks are, you know, the severest of the severe. So yeah, of course, like, there's always a sense of responsibility, not just with the match, but you think, okay, look, if this person is too bad, then not the fact of it being embarrassing, but you're like, look, even a Hungarian person that's 22, and you think, you know, I don't want to see someone getting stretchered out. It's not good for anyone, you know. So you know, for the purpose of filling a slot for us, you're almost like, right, okay, we can't match this person. We'll just put them on another show. Like, they're going to be pissed off. The manager's going to be pissed off. But look, guys, it's this, which A, you're going to get nothing out of. B, the broadcaster's not going to put it on TV. And C, you could properly hurt this person. And C, being the more important one here, there's no point doing it. So I think when you'd explain it like that, most people would be like, okay, I get it.
Move on and talk about some of your existing clients or your new clients at STN Sports. Nice little launch that you've had.
Yeah, it's been cool.
The last 6 months or so, you announced and you kind of made your launch.
Appreciate your shares and your kind of...
That's okay, mate. Don't mind jumping on Twitter now and again, as everybody knows. Let's move on from that. You made
separate podcast.
Separate podcast, yes. My Twitter persona. But anyway, made the announcement. It all went down very well. And then you went into quite a big fight with Canelo Alvarez versus Callum Smith. Now, talk to us about your relationship with Callum Smith. Obviously, a lot of people know him as, you know, being trained by Joe Gallagher. They would have worked together, and Joe, I know, has managed fighters in the past. How long have you been working kind of directly with Callum? Obviously, we would have kind of started that relationship within Matchroom. Talk about that first before we go on to the Canelo fight.
First time I met Callum was going back to the Birmingham show, was in Barno Love. So I think it was Oleg Fedotov's that Callum poleaxed in one round. So that's the first time I met him. We just had a little bit of chit chat. And then the fielding fight was made, I want to say, towards the end of that year. So obviously Matchroom I was doing social media. So I kind of got up there, spent a bit of time with him, was doing a fair bit of social. And yeah, we just, a couple of trips to Sky, we just kind of hit it off. You know, he's a very cool, laid back guy. He does open up a bit more when he's, I guess, more comfortable with people. But yeah, we've always gotten particularly well. When he boxed in Jeddah, he was like, mate, please, like, no disrespect to the other guys at Matchroom. He's like, mate, I really hope they send you over. You know, it's kind of, I want you to be there. I went over to Germany as well for the Holtzkin fight. So yeah, we've always kind of gotten well. Sean O'Toole, business partner, legal whiz kid, who's the chief exec of STN. So Sean's worked with Callum in a sort of legal capacity, and then when we teamed up when I left Matchroom and we launched STN, that was a conversation for Sean to say, look, so I'm working with Eddie, like, what's your kind of thoughts on him coming in to support you? Callum had transitioned from being managed by Joe Gallagher to actually being self-managed himself. So yeah, it was kind of, there was a bit of space from a support perspective there, because that Callum is, you know, peak of his career, fighting the biggest people in the biggest fights. So he felt a need, and certainly that I could come in and support him alongside Joe, alongside the brothers and other people within the team. So yeah, no, it was I suppose a bit of a natural progression, but Callum still had to okay it, which I suppose fortunately he did. So
it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about this kind of boxing being this, I mean, we're going slightly back and off topic again, but boxing being this kind of no entry requirements really to degree. And then obviously, if you want to go and be a matchmaker, you have to go to the board, you have to go observe all of the pleasantries. But there are people who operate without licenses. There are people who operate in ways and means whereby you don't necessarily need to go and do those things. The bar of entry for requirement, or bar of requirement for entry in boxing, I always get that wrong. Good or bad thing for boxing?
I think it's good in some respects because you're getting people from different walks of life. Like I kind of fell into boxing, but I think it's bad as well because you'll probably echo this. Boxing, you get the very best and the very worst of society almost all compressed there. So there's some managers and people that I've, you kind of come across like people just kind of making simple things difficult. And yeah, I think it's the bar event. I think it's good in the UK because it's a bit more regimented. Like you can go to, no disrespect to you, you could go to LA and pay $50 and get a manager's license. It's not. There's no real kind of, I guess, sort of test or like qualifications, or you have to justify your experience. You can write something that you could say anything. You say, I used to be an amateur padman or something. Whereas in the UK, it's a bit stricter, very strict to a degree. And I think rightly so, because you need to be doing something. Look, just because I was at Matchroom and I was going to get the matchmakers, I still had to study. I had to kind of, probably where the green would come from. But you still have to kind of know stuff. Look, I've heard stories of managers, other matchmakers that, it's almost like a driving test where they've flunked it badly and they've had to go away and kind of study. It's not, well, you can just apply and go next month. It's not like you need to actually take some time to digest and understand the requirements for this, because it goes back to what I said. There's people's lives at stake. It's not just, you're doing a process or a procedure or a KPI or something. It's serious business. So people have got to be competent and have the right level of experience to come in.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that as well in kind of this more digital, social media-based boxing kind of landscape. That it's more, it's always been a numbers sport. Like there's people who will try and have you think that Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard used to box for prize and nothing else. It's always been numbers and money and
prize fighting.
It's prize fighting, exactly. But kind of with the kind of the new focuses, as it were, I think it's important not to forget that it's still the most dangerous sport in the world. It is a sport that still requires the most care and the most kind of objective outlooks, really, and people who actually see the sport for what it is and not what they can get from it, if that makes sense.
And there's nothing worse than when you see a fighter that hasn't got it anymore, especially towards the end of their career.
And they're being pushed.
They're being pushed to do a fight, and within one, let's take Krolla. Krolla's someone I got on very well with. We sort of support him on a commercial perspective because he's now retired. But after Lomachenko, he'd done a lot of soul searching. He was thinking that, I want to box at home, and I suppose he kind of owed it to himself, but maybe deserved to have that sort of. I hate the kind of the whole, like a farewell fight, because look at Ricky Hatton. It doesn't always go to plan. There is no script. It's still boxing, and
the other guy's not coming to wish you well.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you're not going to get the guard of honour that you get when you win the Premier League. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I was 50-50 with Krolla doing it, but I'd heard that he was looking great in the gym. So, but even he said he's like, Paul, went and sat back on the stool, and I was like, I've just got to get through this fight because I'm done. And one of few that was honest with himself, but there's others that, and sometimes the fighters need saving from themselves. And I think it's so important to have the right people around you that are not thinking about the money for themselves. Thinking, well, you take this fight because it's a, it's a great opportunity. You can still do it. You can still make the weight. And it's like, well, hang on, and like you're just. 20 years' time, you're not the one with brain damage. You're not the one that hasn't got a pot to piss in. They are. So you've got to protect them. A fighter's always going to want to go out and box. It's going to be very hard for them to say no. So you need to not say no for them, but just kind of look out for them. It's so important.
I think one of the best ways I've ever heard it described is the fighter's the first one to know they're done, but the last one to admit it.
That is on the money. Yeah. Bang on.
Which I think is always a very interesting outlook. But, the kind of the bravado and the macho nature of boxing. And, it's difficult as well. Which is why I have such respect for people like George Groves, who left something on the table, so to speak. I mean, George could have gone there and got, there was umpteen other fights that would have been available for him. One or two he could have probably squeezed out, but decided to leave that on the table. I always feel that's a nice position for fighters to leave the sport in.
Definitely. And look, you don't need to,
one too few than one too many.
Of course, and look, obviously George lost to Callum, but you don't need to obsess about, I have to go out and win. It's kind of, he knew himself.
I think he knew about 3 hours before the weigh-in that he was done.
Yeah. So, but he's a fighter at that stage. You know, he was like, well, I'm not. There's no chance I'm pulling out again. Not just for the financials, but he said he's like, no, I have to do this. I have to fight this guy. So,
back to Callum and Canelo.
Yes.
Obviously, very one-sided fight.
Yeah.
A lot of talk after the fight was kind of surrounding what Callum was going to do next. Now, we've not seen an awful lot from him. We've caught up with him and done a few written pieces, and obviously we've seen little bits and pieces that he's done. But what's the plan now? As I understand, he's looking at 175 as a potential avenue. Any decisions been made, or when can we expect them?
Yeah, so I speak to Callum regularly, probably every other day or most days, quite often just silly stuff on social media. So he's starting to talk a bit more about boxing now. With me and Callum, I guess that he's self-managed, he manages himself. So look, if he ever wants to talk boxing to me, and I've always said this to him, I'm here. He's got 3 brothers that have forgotten more about boxing than I'll ever know. So he's got a very tight circle of people there. But certainly from, I guess a neutral perspective, he's talking a bit more about boxing. I'm not pressing him. I've said, mate, if you want to talk about it, you can pick up the phone to me. I think we're probably waiting that Sean and I will go and see him. Hopefully April, when things open up a bit, we can sit outside. Not get wet if it's typical pissing down the rain over here. But that's the plan. So we're going to go and sit with Callum. But for me, I'd like to see him go up to 175. I think he's got the frame to do it. Look, I think for Callum with the Canelo fight, he's wanted to test himself, but he can make 12 stone. Like I've seen, all the kind of the gruely bits or the non-so gruely bits. He makes it. He makes the weight. But is Callum Smith the same fighter at 12 stone as he would be at 12.7? I don't believe so. But it's his decision. It's his career. He can. And I still, just from how he's talking, he's still got that hunger inside him. He's not like, oh, well, I've won the World Boxing Super Series. Financially, I'm in a brilliant place. No, he still wants for himself. He still wants to fight. That fire still burns strong. So, yeah, I think you're going to see him back in the ring this year. But we'll wait and see what Callum wants to do. And he's at a point now and he's earned that position where he decides what's next for him. But yeah, I'd like to see him at 175.
Yeah, it's one thing being able to make the weight. It's another thing being able to perform at the weight. Yeah. Canelo, how good was he? Because I spoke to you, obviously we speak an awful lot.
Yeah.
I spoke to you during the week when you were out there, and I know that the mood within the camp was very confident, and there was good preparation. There was certainly no excuses before or indeed after with regards to kind of the short training camp and stuff. No, Callum was in the gym, and he fancied the fight. Obviously not, Canelo Alvarez is arguably the best fighter in the world, so I don't think anybody was kind of kidding themselves it being an easy fight, but you were very confident going in. But how good was he on the night?
He was very, very good. Second time I've seen him in the flesh, I was out for Canelo Jacobs. And yeah, special, very special fighter. We were under no illusions, but I just felt, look, he went up and beat Kovalev, okay? And no disrespect to Kovalev, brilliant fighter. The Kovalev that boxed Anthony Yard wasn't the Kovalev against Nathan Cleverly. So...
Even in Ward 1.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. But he still had to go up to that weight, and he took him apart. And Kovalev was doing well, right? Up until then, I think it was always going to go one way. He was always going to catch him. So not necessarily just took solace from that, but like you say, Callum was training. It wasn't sprung on you. Look, he was in the gym. He was training for Canelo in September. Look, bar a contract and things being agreed, in his head, he was fighting Canelo Alvarez in December. So I just think I was really impressed with just how it was like a fraction. He just kept himself out of range when he was throwing shots. And the targeting of the arm, I mean, you're a bit more of a boxing aficionado than I am historically. Is there anyone that's done that before that has targeted a specific area?
I mean, yeah, the specific areas, yeah. I don't think I've ever seen somebody target an arm that specifically. Yeah. I mean, the hip punching of the hips, and
of course, yeah, and I don't mean like body shots. That if someone's susceptible to body shots.
The Cuban kind of school of thought of punching that lead hip to take away the lead leg and the movement is kind of one of the old amateur tricks that was used then. But I don't think I've ever, and also the kind of the specificity of it. I'm going to hit him there to block that catch and counter shot. It wasn't necessarily I'm just going to punch him in the arm to limit his movement. It was a very specific shot. They always say of your Floyd Mayweather's, your Canelo Alvarez, is that your Andre Wards. They take away what you're best at.
Yeah. Which
for Callum
was the left hook.
Is the catch and counter left hook, the shot that ultimately brought George Groves' demise. Yeah. But the presence of mind and kind of also that there's one thing kind of thinking it, there's another thing entirely actually putting it into practice.
Doing it, yeah. And I must admit there was a period where I'm watching, I'm thinking, is his hand gone? Because he's not throwing that shot. And And then you could kind of see, I mean, there was a crowd there, and you could slowly see a sort of a mild hematoma sort of developing. And you're like, he's actually targeting that. And, you sometimes you're in the presence of great. You just have to admire that kind of thought process, tactics, to disarm him. Excuse the pun. It's terrible. But that was their thought process, because, look, the reason we were very confident, and I think like many, I think Canelo's got a very good chin, but Callum Smith hits hard. So, and they were conscientious of that clearly. So they didn't want to trade with Callum. They would have known that this is a guy who's peak, 30 years of age. If we stand and trade with him, it could end badly. But they targeted the arm, and Callum we spoke at the airport on the way back, and he's like, mate, like 4th or 5th round, it was dead. You've got the adrenaline going. Imagine, any sort of niggles and stuff you've got, you just ride through them. But he's like, that arm was just heavy, and I just couldn't move it. And it just kind of, at that point, you're almost one-armed, which
it's not difficult enough as it is.
yeah. So it was, it was hard to watch. But again, I think at that point, he got beaten by the better man. There's no excuses. He's not one to kind of mope around. I think, I'd imagine, again, not having a fight before, but your first professional defeat is going to be hard to digest. And I think he found that. He's lucky that his brothers have all boxed at the highest level. Liam's a world champion. They've all kind of been there and experienced that, and they could be there to support him, and he's needed that. But yeah, Canelo, phenomenal, ridiculous.
We're going to have to move on, because we are getting close to the former WBO super featherweight champion of the world, Barry Jones, coming in here and caving my head in. One of the fight weeks that I want to talk to you about, very famous fight week, Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz in New York. It was only June 2019, but it feels like about 10 years ago. It really does. Now, obviously, being out there for that week, it was AJ's coming to America. It was his big coming out party. Obviously, the build-up was somewhat disrupted by Jarrell, the walking pharmacy Miller. Talk to us about the kind of the preparation for that, and then actually the week itself, because the week itself, even now looking back, was something of a blur for me, and I was still very much on the outside of it, whereas you were, we'd have been right in the thick of it.
Yeah. It was a crazy week, I think, going out to New York, and I think it was the end of, we'd had 3 or 4 shows before. I'm trying to think if there was I think Fitzgerald Fowler was before. Was that April?
That was before. I think that was late March, because that was on the Eggington Liam Smith undercard in Liverpool.
Yes. So yeah,
I don't know. It could have been March or April. Who knows?
Anyway, but no, it was a crazy week. We've gone out there, and I think, look, obviously Joshua had prepared for Miller. Miller was the expectation, and he, without checking it, he looked physically. I remember the first time I saw him at the was the hotel where they had the kind of
the mixer on the early.
So I remember him coming out of the lift with kind of the crew, big Neil Harding, and he come out and he had this sort of Under Armour skin top on, and I looked at him and I was like, he looks fucking huge. Like, he's someone who every time you see him, he's just this wardrobe of he's almost like a running back, right, for an NFL team. But no, I thought he looked big, and I genuinely was never ever concerned. Might show what I know about boxing, but I was never ever concerned. Again, just more the size aspect. I remember when Eddie said, "Oh, we've got Ruiz," and you think, okay, hand speed, that's going to cause some issues. But again, you just thought that he's just going to overpower him at some point. I think Ruiz holds his feet, doesn't he? He's kind of plants his feet and he's bang, bang, bang with the hands. So
fast hands, slow feet.
Yeah. But so I just felt, okay, he's going to be there. He'll probably trouble him in points, but I thought Josh was just going to hit too hard. And
was that decision made by Eddie for Ruiz?
Eddie, Rob and Joshua, it would have been, yeah. So he just kind of, I think after Miller was out, we done a normal sit down and go through the cards. But yeah, I think obviously they, you go back out to market and you try, and it's difficult when you're fighting Joshua because everyone throws their name into the hat, and they were looking at opponents. And I think Ruiz was one that was available. So yeah, Eddie, Rob and Joshua would have made the selection there. And yeah, I thought, okay, well, he'd still win. It wasn't, everyone's an expert afterwards. Like, I knew he was going to beat. No, you didn't. Just stop talking shit. It's like, outside of Ruiz's team, no one thought that he was going to beat Anthony Joshua. And that's not to take anything away from him, by the way, with that performance. But yeah, you have the normal, the rules meeting and stuff. And they were very confident all week. I mean, I've been around Manny Robles a couple of times, very cool guy. And they were, I remember him putting the gloves on. And Rob McCracken's to my left, he's there. And they're both trying the gloves on, and he's hitting them, and he's got like the Pro Elite Everlast, if you know your gloves. And he's like, these are good. And Rob was like, you know, they're like, you know, Joshua was always, he wore Grant for that fight actually. So yeah, he had Grant a rival. So again, go to the arena, Katie Taylor, boxed, then Callum Smith. And because of Kate, I mean, Kate's fight was incredible. So I'd gone in, and I've
one
always,
of the best fights I've ever seen
it
live.
was amazing.
Brilliant fight.
So I went into her changing room. I've always gotten very well with her team. Still speak to them regularly now. And I was sort of chilling with them. And the fight started. So I thought, right, I'm going to go and take my seat first. You know, first couple of rounds. And I think obviously what round was the first knockdown?
Third round.
Third round. So yeah, I was obviously in there maybe longer than I thought. And I just remember looking at the screen, and Joshua had put him down. And you think, I was like, no, Brian Peters' case. Oh, Paul, get your ass out there. Come on, you're going to miss it. So I was like, hang on. I'll wait for him to get back up. And then he caught him. And you've just looked around. I've looked at Katie, and she's just horrified. Like, she's just been in the fight of her life, and she's just like, wow, you know, just. And I was like, right, I'm going. So I had to get out there, and I've just kind of gone in, and you can just hear this, you know,
the atmosphere.
The atmosphere
when Joshua went down was unbelievable.
Time, yeah. And I mean, he was out. I mean, I'm there thinking he's going to get stopped. Like, you know, certainly after the second knockdown. And I think, but you know, I felt a bit for McCracken because he got a lot of criticism. People say, "Oh, yeah, what's his?" But I actually thought his instructions, when there was loads, you know, there's countless replays. When you hear what he's actually saying to Joshua, he's telling him the correct things to do. He was just concussed. You know, it just obviously for Joshua at the time, he probably was aware where he was.
He was talking some gibberish.
He was, and then you've got all the conspiracy theories that I'm sure he had a hard training camp. There was niggles, but I was in the changing room watching him hit the pads just before he come out. And again, it's pads, but I didn't see anything from the changing room or before leading up to that fight that I thought there's a big problem there. Look, I can't say I'm massively close with his team. We've kind of spoken, we're aware of each other, but I didn't see anything myself, even in the sort of behind the scenes close proximity. I thought we're up for an upset. It did seem like a bit of a formality, and yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, you don't often get those jaw dropping moments, but that was one where you're like, wow, really, really big shock.
What was the reaction within Matchroom afterwards, other than pure shock? Yeah,
pure shock. I think I suppose people just thinking, okay, well, what next? I mean, fair play to him. I remember Eddie stayed on a couple of days, and they had a bit of food the next day. And when you come back in his office, he's like, "No, like we're doing, we're exercising." He's determined to do it, and fair, but he was adamant about that. So he's never really thought, let's not have that fight. It's not. Obviously, he's lost his world titles, and I'm not a massive fan of this. We'll just keep rematching until you beat the person. But no, hang on, you're world champion. You want to get them back, right? He's come and beat you. So, and yeah, he dived straight back into it. And I just thought, yeah, he's definitely going to win this fight. And obviously, you heard about Andy Ruiz. Party time, he was kind of living it up. The videos of him where he's coming down that ramp and he's in like a Rolls and he's got like eating pizza, he's got some sort of banging hip hop playing, and you're like, mate, you are living your life.
Yeah, he was really living his best life after that. I remember he came over for the press conference in London, and I think they'd done New York, then Saudi, and then come to do London, or they did London, New York, Saudi, New York, and London. By the end of that week, Mr. Ruiz looked like he'd been having himself a good time on the
I bet you.
on the flights and what have you. You mentioned Katie Taylor. It's not somebody who we hear an awful lot from in the media, myself included. But as you said beforehand, you've played a kind of a critical part in matching her career to date. Yeah. What a person to work with. I mean, I think you'll look back in years to come and that will be right up there with the people you worked with.
Yeah, incredible. I think Kate, I matched, so third fight, I think Monica Gentili was the first fight that I'd done. So she had her debut, Kopinska, then she boxed Ivanov in the December on Joshua Molina. And then, so probably from there up until world title, which sort of Eddie done those fights, but like Bustos when she boxed over her in New York. Yeah, McCaskill, yeah.
Which in hindsight is a very good win.
Yeah, that was a good win. That's probably more Eddie. But I think certainly pretty much maybe 3-4 of her fights, but she's cool. When she boxed Jasmine Clarkson on the Broner, Mikey Garcia on the card, I went over with her and the team for that. But yeah, she's cool. I mean, it is quite surreal sometimes, we'll sort of text and stuff, and texting her about Sandy, and she's like, no, she's a very good fighter. I'm like, oh, maybe we get some sparring. So, like genuinely, I want to get, Sandy's ears are probably pricking up now, but I'd be keen for her to go over because I think they'll miss each other. because by the time Sandy gets to world level, but I'd love her to have that experience, because you're not going to get better sparring than going out to spar Katie Taylor.
And that's kind of where I was going with it. Obviously, you've just announced that Sandy will be turning professional under STN Sports. Having your experience with somebody like a Katie Taylor and being able to draw on the experience of working with, look, one of Ireland's greatest ever sports people.
Yeah.
Absolute superstar in Ireland. Check her out in the Boxing Social magazine. St. Patrick's Day edition coming March 15th, although this will probably go out after then, but still, get it anyway. That must be invaluable, not only for Sandy, but also yourself, kind of having that close proximity with somebody like Katie Taylor and being able to draw on those experiences.
No, definitely. And not just Katie, but done a couple of Shannon Courtney's fights. I mean, Shannon didn't quite have the experience of them. Tasha Jonas, Terry Harper, I think I've done one or two of Terry's fights. So yeah, look, female boxing it's not a fad anymore. It's it's a serious business. There's some incredible fighters. There's some incredible stories, and yeah, I mean, I suppose that work with Cal Yafai as well. Very privileged that the first fighter that we officially signed and who is going to turn professional in the summer is a female fighter. Girl dad like yourself. I've got two. It's a big deal personally, and yeah, I think look, certainly a lot of experiences with Katie I can draw upon. I've said to Sandy, look, some of your first couple of fights, it's about getting the experience. That I wouldn't put her in 4-rounders. We've had that. I'll keep probably what the plan is close to my chest until we've got the sort of promotional thing in place. But within 18 months, I'd put her in with anyone, providing she does what's expected up until then. She hasn't boxed since 2019. She needs to be active. She needs to have 6-rounders, a couple of 8-rounders. But yeah, certainly when she's in single digits of fights, she will be fighting for a world title, because I want her to be a 2-weight world champion. I think that's definitely possible.
Okay, well, before I let you go, it wouldn't be right without me asking about another one of your charges. A certain Dalton Smith, who is somebody who is really catching the eye of people in the ring, and obviously people away from things with sparring and what have you. I've spoken before on the podcast about witnessing some of his sparring sessions with Luke Campbell in preparation for the Ryan Garcia fight. Really, really talented kid, Mr. Dalton Smith. Obviously, I'd spoken to Sandy about this. Another person who, for admittedly completely different reasons, missed out on that Olympic dream that he'd kind of had as a very successful amateur, but is now starting to really carve out a great little career as one of the top prospects, certainly in British boxing, if not worldwide.
Yeah. So Sean, sort of Dalton's advisor on part of the kind of sort of management team with Dalton. So yeah, look, sort of Sean and Grant will kind of have the final say, but I'll have a bit of seasoning on some of the fight selections. But no, he's progressing very well. It's a shame we couldn't get Townend for the last fight. I think that would have been a good one. But I mean, he's not far away. Someone like Joe Hughes within the next 6 months. Joe fancies that fight. I think it'd probably be Townend next, or an equivalent type level person. I think someone like Joe Hughes towards the end of the year, and I think him and Harlem Eubank has the capabilities to be a very big fight for a British or European title next year. And I think they're both on a bit of a collision course. I saw Harlem actually. I went and watched the Kelly Avanesian fight. We didn't speak about Dalton, but I just think, like, again, fan friendly stylistically, that's a great fight between those two next year. Also with Dalton, I mean, you've come to the end of the Sheffield cycle of Kell Brook, and Kid Galahad seems like he could potentially go on forever with how hard he trains. But, Kell Brook is no longer around up those parts of the woods, so to speak. Good opportunity for Dalton, who we've seen him recently speaking about his ambitions of fighting a Sheffield Wednesday's ground. And that must be a real great thing for him to look forward to, but also for you and STN Sports, something that you're going to want to deliver somewhere down the line. No, definitely. And I think for him, look, he's inspired David Avanesian, heard from Grant that he'd done really, really well in that spar. So, it's... like you say, you witnessed him against Luke Campbell, and I had some good things there. There's obviously learning points as well. But I think for him, he's someone who he can. Sheffield is infamous fighting city. They've always, I suppose, when you look in the UK, right? Who's the flag bearer in Manchester? Who's the flag bearer in Sheffield? And he's definitely got that sort of, I think, the look, the charisma. There's like a quiet swag with Dalton, and I kind of say this to him that he's very into his hip hop, and he's a cool guy. He's kind of more. More less talk, more action. He's going to have to talk a bit more and kind of make himself a bit known to get that sort of for that star quality to shine through. But no, I think, look, he's got the capabilities. Definitely, when crowds return, I'd like to see him maybe headline the next gen show in Sheffield. It'd be great to see.
Well, we look forward to seeing it. Hopefully, I can go to that one. We'll wait and see if
We'll
I'm.
squeeze you in.
Yeah,
Videographer.
Squeeze me.
On the team list.
I could be STN's official media representative for the night. Paul Reddy, real pleasure. Obviously,
pleasure.
the first time that we've done an official interview.
Thank you for having us in.
You're very, very welcome. I'm sure that we'll have you down again sometime soon. But yes, from me, Rob Tebbutt, from him, Paul Reddy, that has been Boxing Behind the Scenes. Thank you very much for stopping by and watching the Boxing Social podcast. Stay tuned for another episode coming soon.
Big up.
Done.